Big news story today, and it's another one of those stories which is, well, very embarrassing for little old New Zealand. How can you possibly lose an entire ship? A ship which is supposed to be surveying the reef of Samoa, got a little bit too up close and personal with said reef, caught fire, sank. Fortunately, everybody rescued, but $100 million down, and no firm advice as to whether or not insurance is going to cover this. Certainly, you can't ensure your international credibility. John Peachey joining me on the program now. Kia ora, good morning.
Oh, yeah, good morning. I was having a look in the garage to see if I could find that ship. It must be around here somewhere. I don't know. It's I know it's unkind. It's unkind. It's almost unbelievable, isn't it? Really,
It is, and
yeah.
it is. I mean, we can take perhaps some consolation from the fact that in terms of maritime disasters, whilst the sinking of the ship was a disaster, the rescue operation was fantastic. Everybody safe and accounted for, although a bit damp, apparently. So well done there to New Zealand's Navy and everybody else involved in the rescue operation. I'm sure there'll be inquiries, and I mean, yeah, this is the new Rhema, perhaps, although a little bit more embarrassing for New Zealand.
Well, I'm just trying to work out how on earth it happened. I mean, one thing's for sure, they did find the reef. They found the reef. That's a good thing. They were looking for the reef. They found the reef. I mean, you shouldn't make light of it, of course, but I actually wondered whether or not they might have struck like an old World War II mine or something. Yeah. I mean, the fact that it caught fire, I mean, it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, really. So it's going to be an interesting court of inquiry.
Yeah.
And I know I used to do a little bit of work with the Navy, so I know some of the Navy commanders, and they're very serious and fantastic people.
Yep.
To be a commander in charge of a ship that goes down, that's not just an accident. That's a huge humiliation in terms of honor and a whole range of things. So,
yeah.
Many years ago, I had an audio company, and we used to do all these functions for official Navy celebrations. And I love the pomp and ceremony, because when a ship captain changed or a commander changed on a vessel, they'd have this very formal passing of the sword ceremony, or these two beautifully dressed uniformed leaders would march towards each other, one with a sword and one without. Yeah. And the current captain would pass the sword, and the person who received the sword would say, "I have the ship."
Wow.
And the captain giving up the ship would say, "You have the ship." And it was this, I mean, it's all kind of very oldie worldy, but it was something really actually quite remarkable and quite joyous about this formal ceremony. And so I really, and all joking aside, I really feel sorry for this commander, because it's actually a heck of a thing to lose a ship.
It is. And whilst it's very easy, particularly on a Monday morning, and particularly, I don't know, talk radio's got a bit of a reputation for this, it's very easy to poke holes in other people, like the holes in the Manawanui. Yeah, this joke just keeps on giving, honestly. It's easy to go, oh gosh, isn't it terrible? Gosh, New Zealand, how embarrassing. New Zealand Navy, how could this possibly happen? But actually, we've got some holes in our ship as well, as the church in New Zealand, that, abandon all hope into the life rafts, because it seems like, and I mean, this is a little bit melodramatic perhaps, JP, but it looks like the ship's going down, but especially in some parts of the church.
It's kind of hard for me. I've attended a couple of church services in recent times. I do a bit of, I guess you'd call itinerant preaching, contract preaching with different churches, and I've been to a couple of places recently where the average age of the congregation would be 70 plus. Mm-hmm. And in a couple of cases, kind of tragically, it was probably 80, and that's being underestimated, 80 to 90% female. So where were the older men? Mm-hmm. And so there's some pretty poor answers to that question, maybe, but certainly a lack of younger people, and it really concerns me. Andrew, there's some fantastic experiments going on around the world on how to mix generations together.
Yeah.
There's a Swedish housing experiment I was reading about recently, that it's kind of like this, what they call collective living experience. So a big apartment block with an internal kind of games room and meeting cafe type thing. So it's a wonderful design.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of people from different generations who get together intentionally. And that's part of if you live in this place, you must attend some of these kind of collaborative social functions between, quite young people, early 20s, and people in their significant last third of their life, and they get together, and apparently the friendships that are made and the connections and the understanding is just out of this world. But it's not the first time. There was an experiment done in Australia and in the United States where they put young teenagers. So the premise was this: that what do young teenagers and elderly people have in common? The tragedy was what they had in common was loneliness.
Wow.
And they thought, well, why don't we mix these two groups together? So there were people over the age of 75, and some of them were considerably over that age, and they put them with teenagers between the age of sort of 13 and 16, and the result was just marvelous, marvelous result. And I think we've got some things to learn in the church about this, because I always think that we're losing something when our younger people are not rubbing shoulders with those who are a bit crusty and have been around a long time, and actually know which way is up. And I think that's a real tragedy. But to me, it's becoming really apparent in a number of churches. There's no one under the age of 40. And we just got to do something different, I think.
I think even for churches that are doing relatively well, there'll be churches that have got, we've got people from various generations, although they don't mix. You've got a seniors thing on a Wednesday afternoon where they all get together to play rummy cub, and then you've got a youth group activity, which is a different part of the week, that even for churches that have multi-generational members, they're not mingling as much as perhaps would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's right. And even, parts of our society, what we're doing is we're building all these retirement villages. Yeah. And simply by definition, they are exclusive communities. I know some people want to retire and forget all the youth and the craziness that went on. Yeah. But I just think sometimes that's not just a smart idea. But you're right. Within churches, I think we've got to be highly intentional. Really, we're only one of the very few recent generations in history that separate people out by groupings and by definitions, and it doesn't make any sense. It's not. I don't think it's biblical. Not that it's specifically unbiblical, but I just think in terms of cultural, historical, biblical, generations live together, right? I mean, some of them are 900. So I mean, we had some pretty significant generations living together. Ever thought about that? I wonder how many people lived in Methuselah's house. So several hundred, I would imagine. So but we're losing something, and I think I may have said this in the past. One of the tragedies for me is that I was working with a church that had a number of significant retired missionaries and people who'd been in full-time professional ministry, but there was no one to pass that on to. Wow. Nobody was young. And I think that for me is an absolute crime, that we don't have that value of sitting with people who've got some experience to pass on.
Can I circle back momentarily to the nautical metaphor that we started with? For some churches, have we reached tipping point? Is regardless of what we do, we've hit the iceberg. There's no way that we can patch this. The bilge pumps are working. Flat tack. This is not a survivable situation. Are there some congregations in New Zealand where that's just the reality?
Well, I think that is, and that's a terrible conclusion to have to come to. But I think it's a realistic conversation. And look, and one of the highly practical things, Andrew, is that we've got buildings who are not being maintained. Yeah. I mean, I know of many churches that they cannot maintain their buildings because there simply is no young people with the energy and the paintbrushes and the ladders to do the work. Yeah. You can't expect people who are well retired to be climbing up, onto huge old roofs and doing maintenance and bits and pieces. It's not practical. They also don't have the money to pay people to do that. So there is a highly practical aspect of having mixed generations in terms of working bees and keep properties, maintained and in line. But it's not just we're missing young people. Even youth groups are missing. The percentages of young women versus young men is massively different. Yeah. So our young men are nowhere to be seen.
If you want to attract young men to your church, have lots of young women. that sort of hormonal evangelism does wonders.
That's
But
right,
it's, and hey, motivations vary, but the results speak for themselves in that regard. Something which, again, trying to stick with this nautical metaphor, I'm going to milk this for all it's worth, JP.
Go for it. Go for it.
But maybe part of the challenge is that our churches are more like cruise ships than they are like battleships.
Oh, ouch.
And hey, we've recently had a very expensive game of battleships in the South Pacific as a country, so that's a little bit fresh. But perhaps our churches are more about entertaining and pandering to the needs of a particular generation, rather than being equipped to communicate the gospel to a world that desperately needs it. Am I being too controversial, John?
No, I don't think you are, actually. I don't think enough people are having this conversation, really. I was talking to a pastor who had a delegation come to her to talk about a men's group weekend they were going to have. They were going to have all a bunch of guys go off, young and old, go off together. And a delegation from the youth came to see them and protested and said, "What do you mean it's a men's thing? What century you're living in? You can't do that now. It has to be, it has to be multi-gender." And they were serious, and it's like, for goodness sake, right? So there's odd things going on that if we don't sort that out, I think we're going to be in all sorts of trouble. And I'm not going to get into gender politics today, but
no, we'll save that for another occasion. But I suppose the aspects of saying, as a church community, yes, we're wanting to meet the needs of the people because we're so desperate to get more people to come to our church. But if it's about entertaining people and meeting their needs rather than inspiring them to take up arms to make a difference in their community, then I don't know, maybe we're preaching the wrong message.
Well, I mean, Scripture's pretty clear. Faith without works is dead. And when Jesus got the sheep and the goats together, his statement was, "If you've done this unto the least of these, you've done it unto me." You can't separate actually doing something. I love Sunday. I love worship. I'm not opposed to a big band and a great spectacle. I think that's good, but you've got to balance that with the other 6 days of the week. Are you actually going out and doing anything for people? And you only have to read the news to know that there's places to go. The mission field ain't going away.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good point, right? We're a good old cruise ship with a pool and a good smorgasbord dining doesn't go amiss, but at some point you've got to come back to reality, don't you? So I think it's a conversation that needs to be had because the figures are telling us bad things.
John, I really appreciate the work that you do and shining a light on some of the issues that we need to have those tough conversations about. Of course, you can find out more about John at thethinkfarm.org or the People's Mechanic podcast. JP, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, good to see you, man.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.